promise to do my best, to do my duty, to get out of my country, to help other people, and they will out of the pack.
Okay, down here in the basement, I have a few of my older Scout uniforms. Here, I love being in the Scouts. It was great. Exploring in the woods, campfires, wilderness survival. I think I was a good Scout, but once in a while, I went outside the boundaries.
David Hahn was no ordinary Boy Scout. He spent his teenage years building a nuclear reactor in his garden shed. The result was an environmental disaster. I'd always thought that nuclear science was done in high-tech labs costing millions of dollars. So how did David conduct a series of nuclear experiments in his backyard using everyday items? In a series of demonstrations, this program will show you how he did it. But whatever you do, don't try this at home. My image of the Boy Scouts is of a bunch of clean-cut kids earning merit badges by helping old ladies cross the street. But David's nuclear adventures began with his quest for the merit badge the Boy Scouts offer in, of all things, atomic energy.
A lot of people seem to think that it's unusual that there's an atomic energy merit badge, but I don't think it's any more unusual than some of the other specialized badges that we have, like beekeeping or snow sports.
David's now 26 and lives with his dad in Michigan.
This is my merit badge sash right here, and my three favorites here were atomic energy, chemistry, and general science. I was interested in nuclear energy before I even came in the Scouts. And they explained to me they had this neat little looking badge with the atom and electrons circling around it, and I thought that would be cool to have.
The projects in the Atomic Energy Merit Badge book are surprisingly hands-on. They encourage Scouts to build an electroscope, make their own Geiger counter, and construct a model of a nuclear reactor.
You can make a model of a nuclear reactor using these materials which you have at home. Splitting of the atom occurs here in the uranium core.
I don't think the Boy Scouts ever dreamed that one of their flock would actually track down radioactive elements and try to build a real reactor.
Of nuclear power.
But the Merit Badge book offered up a list of available radioactive sources.
Here it is, atomic energy.
What sort of practical information did you get that from that book?
Practical, like everyday uses. The uses right here: smoke detectors, watches, thorium lantern mantles, heart pacemakers. Those were some practical everyday radiation sources. I didn't understand how easy it was to perform nuclear experiments until I read this book.
David was an all-American kid, but he had a consuming passion for science. He was obsessed by this old science book for children, the Golden Book of Chemistry Experiments.
He read this book probably a couple hundred times, backwards and forwards.
I considered the book a little bit. It was really important to me. It was like a little sacred keepsake I could always come back to for a new experiment.
Every one of these, he could do this experiment. You could say, okay, Dave, do the carbon dioxide one. He'd think about it, and then he would go through and do it exactly like that.
This image of Marie and Pierre Curie discovering radium completely captured his young imagination.
I thought it was pretty mysterious and luminous and magical, and I did whatever I could to try to get my hands on.
We used to call Dave Glowboy. From the group of people I hung around with, Dave was really the only one who was really interested in radioactivity. The rest of us might have had some passing interest. When he brought Geiger counters into school, we'd play around with them. You know, the standard high school joke of, what the heck is this green thing? You know, quick, bring the Geiger counter, see if it's radioactive.
David's curiosity knew no bounds. He raided his dad's stash of college-level physics and chemistry texts. He found that the books from the 1950s and 60s offered the most hands-on information on nuclear science.
This book is the one where I got most of the nuclear information from. Matter of fact, oh, do I got an old piece of my research in here? Ha, look at that. One of the old, there we go, that's an old one. That's the only one I got left right now. I was trying to find out how I could produce neutrons or something of that nature.
How old were you when you wrote that equation?
I might have been around 11, 12 years old, maybe.
When he couldn't find the information in books, David wrote letters to institutions like the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. He got the best results when he posed as a college lecturer and signed his letters from Professor David Hahn.
I received information on answers to all the equations I was missing and had questions about. I received information in packets about radioactive materials, where they were derived from. I received information about how to isolate nuclear materials chemically, on and on and on and on.
Despite his advanced knowledge of all things nuclear, David used basic kitchen equipment for his experiments. He used to keep hazardous radioactive materials in Tupperware and sandwich bags.
I knew what I was doing wasn't completely right, but I believe it was important to experiment. In life, this is a quote, you know, if you don't take risks, you don't do anything. If you don't do anything, you are nothing, end quote. And that's just something I heard on the radio, and that's sort of been my philosophy with chemistry and experiments.
While most teenagers were hanging out at the mall, David was looking for radioactive materials for his experiments. When he was 16 and old enough to drive, he even rigged up a Geiger counter in his car. A lot of what he needed was at his local Kmart.
Pharmacy line 1.
I'm trying to look past all the advertising, the boxes, and the papers. I sort of look at the elements that the materials are composed of. Oh, here we go. Smoke detectors have 1 microcurie of americium-241. That was always good as a source material for alpha particles. The containers, the labware, it's all here. Let's see. Sodium hypochlorite. Propane I needed? Yes, lithium right here. 6-volt lithium. I would get as many of those batteries as I could, even though they were expensive. Okay, here we go. Lanterns. Here they are. I would try to verify which ones were radioactive and which ones weren't. As you can see, all these are not radioactive here.
Can you still get thorium lanterns?
No, but you can buy thorium nitrate on eBay.
David found what he was looking for, but what was he planning to do with stuff like thorium?
Thorium is a radioactive element which is used in old gas lanterns to make them glow more brightly. To extract thorium for your own experiments, get as many lantern mantles as you can find. Blowtorch them into a powder, mix the powder with some lithium from a battery, then wrap it all up in foil. Now heat your chemicals in a tin can filled with cooking oil. This will give you pure radioactive thorium. If you have enough of it, you can fuel a nuclear reactor. In a reactor, thorium can change into uranium or plutonium, which is used in nuclear bombs.
David also spent hours at home extracting the radioactive material from other household items like smoke detectors.
The use of americium in smoke detectors is one of the examples of a very beneficial use of a radioactive substance. Inside of the detector, it's well shielded and poses no danger to the people who use them. However, opening up a smoke detector, and there are labels on it that say not to do this, and extracting the americium can be a dangerous thing to do.
Are you supposed to take that out?
No, you're not. But when I was younger and I was working on the reactor, this is where I got my material.
How many smoke detectors do you think you've taken apart?
Hundreds. Maybe 300 smoke detectors. The americium-241 is in the center of the button. You can see if I bring the button closer here. It's a high level of radiation that the americium gives off. To me, that's as good as gold.
This is some americium that David Hahn removed from a smoke detector.
I wouldn't have a safety concern over a single source like this.
If I had those from hundreds of smoke detectors?
Yes, that'd be a level of concern to me in terms of how those sources are being used or handled.
A neutron gun makes elements radioactive, so you'll want to build your own. You will need a lead block, some aluminum foil, and the radioactive americium from hundreds of smoke detectors. the americium will give off a stream of radioactive alpha rays. When alpha rays hit the aluminum in the foil, they produce subatomic particles called neutrons. Neutrons react with other elements and turn them radioactive. Your neutron gun is neutron fun and an excellent source of radiation.
I would be very concerned if a scout wanted to build a neutron gun because that could sort of lead to worse experiments that would potentially get the scout in a lot of danger.
To track down radioactive materials for his nuclear reactor, David scoured all kinds of locations. Among the rocks on the shores of the Great Lakes, he hoped to stumble across naturally occurring radioactive elements like uranium and radium. He was usually disappointed. Michigan was not that radioactive. But he did build up a collection of rocks from other sources.
I have some radioactive rocks here. I've got pitchblende, uranite, and I have a piece here. I'm not at liberty to say where it comes from, but this is a piece of radium ore. And same kind of ore that Marie Curie isolated radium from.
Is that a dangerous level of radiation?
Oh yeah, but not, well, yeah, it's quite dangerous, but these are like my antiques.
Are you sure it's not illegal to have those rocks?
Some of these rocks can be purchased from places in the United States, so I'm sure it's not illegal.
I found David's love of radium slightly troubling. His childhood hero, Marie Curie, who discovered the radioactive element, had died of radiation poisoning. But as a teenager, David was always on the lookout for sources of radium.
A little while ago, I was driving on Crocker Road here, and I had my Geiger counter on my dashboard, and I was searching for rocks or anything in buildings or anything in houses. Maybe somebody had something laying out in the garbage I could get. And I ended up coming up to an antique store up here. And the Geiger counter, the meter, the ticks were more frequent, and I noticed it spiked a little bit, and I noticed that there was something in there. I just had to find out where.
He had detected an old glow-in-the-dark clock. The dial was painted with radium, and this one came complete with a small vial of the radioactive paint.
He left me a little note saying that if I ever found any more of these clocks, that he'd be willing to pay me whatever I wanted, and then signed David, and I think he even dated it, but the funny part was I kept questioning, what did I sell? Was it really expensive and I didn't know it? What was so great about the clock?
Radium paint was used in glow-in-the-dark clocks and watches up until the 1950s. David had heard stories about the radium girls. They were the factory workers who painted the clock faces with this toxic paint. Many of them died of horrible cancers and other illnesses.
I would not keep a clock that's been painted with radioluminous paint involving radium, although the items are considered exempt. That is, they're considered safe, one at a time. But it's quite another matter to dismantle this and then to physically scrape the radioluminous paint. You've got yourself something altogether different than what was originally intended.
To extract the radium from your glow-in-the-dark clock, you have to take the hands off, very carefully. Gently dip the hands in solvent to remove the paint. And there you have it, real glowing radioactive radium, an excellent high-grade source for your reactor.
Down in his basement, David pulled out his prized collection of radium clocks and other antiques which had survived his experiments.
These are radium glow spotter rings, and they're from the 50s to 60s.
Is there more radium in those rings than in the clocks?
I could check. I believe so, but yeah, I could give you a visual on it real quick. Yes. Should it be illegal to have the clocks? Should it be illegal to have the rings? Should life be illegal? The Constitution, I live in the land of the free. So if I'm not hurting anybody, why shouldn't I be free?
David had now collected so much radioactive material that he wanted to put it all to good use. His goal? To build a breeder reactor, a device which could produce plutonium, the most dangerous radioactive element of all.
There are arguments for and against the use of breeder reactors. On one, it is a way to get a lot of fuel at a very inexpensive price. On the downside, it's a very dangerous thing to do, and if there's a catastrophe involving a breeder reactor, the consequences can be very severe.
Radiation does have side effects if it's uncontrolled, but in a controlled environment, the benefits outweigh the risk, always. The benefits always outweigh the risk.
He was looking for ways to make something, to invent something that would help ease the drain on the world's oil supply. That's one thing he told me, yes.
Did you understand what he meant at the time?
Oh, absolutely not.
He just wanted to do something to get noticed, I think. I think that's all it was, just for attention.
What do you think?
Perhaps. Huh?
Do you think it worked?
He got the attention all right. Yeah, it worked.
It's time to bring together everything you've learned from your nuclear experiments. Place the americium from the smoke detectors and radium from the clocks on a piece of foil. This will be the radioactive core of your reactor. Make some cubes out of the thorium from the gas lanterns and ordinary charcoal and wrap them in foil too. Arrange the cubes into a bigger cube. Drop the americium and radium core into the center of the cube and bind it all together in duct tape. Cobalt drill bits will act as your control rods. This is now a makeshift reactor. If the reactor is working, you can now make plutonium.
This is where David's experiments started to go wrong. He took me to the house where his garden shed once stood and showed me where he kept his reactor.
If I was to enter the shed here, enter the shed, it was about right here. Concrete cement blocks surrounding it. So it was already protected by concrete.
His Geiger counter was now picking up radiation all the way across the yard.
I knew if the ticks were increasing like that, if the beeps coming out of the audio here were increasing, that some kind of rays were coming out of that shed and getting over to the front of this counter.
So were you worried?
Yeah, I got concerned at that time.
Concerned.
Worried. I was scared.
It seemed that his reactor was actually working. Scared that he might irradiate the whole neighborhood, he dismantled the reactor and put it in his car. But barely a half a mile from home, the police stopped him and asked to search his vehicle. He told them the contents of the trunk were radioactive. He didn't look like a typical nuclear physicist. The authorities thought he was a terrorist.
What we would now call a dirty bomb was certainly a possibility. That was one of our initial thoughts. Again, we had thoughts, too, of a nuclear weapon.
When they analyzed what they had found in David's car, they soon realized it wasn't a bomb, but something far more perplexing.
We found a collection of some 50 or so small, 1 inch on a side, cubes wrapped in aluminum foil, and within the aluminum foil was a black cake-like material which was radioactive. It was thorium-232, but this particular form of it was not only much higher than you'd find in nature, but it was about 100 times the quantity that would be considered licensable.
David was about to get a visit from the Environmental Protection Agency.
I got a phone call, a very unusual phone call. It was David. He was kind of frantic on the phone at the time.
The EPA people were using Geiger counters and devices.
I believe his words were, "I've just been raided by the EPA. They're here."
In the house, in the basement, Dave's bedroom.
I thought, oh my God.
I could see that his little experiments were on a lot bigger scale than I could have ever imagined.
He actually had been doing what he had been talking about.
This is what can happen when a teenager takes a keen interest in radioactive chemistry and the EPA finds out about it. A team of government contractors...
David's garden shed was declared a radiological hazard. The entire structure and its contents were carted away by men in protective suits.
The inquisitive teenager was not at home this afternoon.
The cost of the cleanup was $75,000.
For men in moon suits to come out and actually dismantle the shed and saw it apart piece by piece and take it away in barrels, that's very serious. And I don't think David realized, the magnitude.
David's garden shed is now buried at this radioactive waste dump in the middle of the Utah desert. But did his reactor actually work? Had he really created plutonium in his backyard?
I believe I did produce a few atoms of plutonium, maybe a couple fissions here and there, but I don't think anything sustained any kind of reaction. See, I believe that it was the thought that counted.
At this point now in time, I'm very proud of Dave. It's not many 15-year-old kids that can put something together like this. In my wildest dreams, I don't think I could have done it.
I feel that David Hahn should have known better. I mean, his motivations for doing it were unclear. His end goal seemed to be to make stuff radioactive, and that's not something that I want people to be doing just for the fun of it.
David was never charged with any criminal offense. It seems he hadn't actually broken any laws. The regulations were designed for institutions, not private individuals. And despite all the fuss he caused, David still believes it was well worth the effort.
I think if somebody thinks they can accomplish something, and if somebody's willing to take some risk out there, and their underlying intentions are good, then sometimes the laws don't always apply.